Do you want to spin to win in Diablo 4? We're going to go over a Whirlwind Barbarian build. We're going to go over every aspect of the build that includes the gear, the skills, problems you may have, and gameplay loop. The Whirlwind Barbarian is spinning and winning, but you need to generate a lot of fury in order to do so. So a lot of times you'll see characters spinning in a circle as a barbarian, and that is their whirlwinding. What is required in this build is a lot of fury generation, which is the resource type for barbarians. Use most of our skills in order to generate this and for extra buffs along the way. You can clear a group of enemies like they never even existed, and you can do so while zooming around the map after you kill some enemies or some elites, and you can go. It's one of the fastest speed running builds. With a group, it is one of the best because you also take the benefits of their shouts from the barbarian along with your group members, so you can buff them. If you can't do the damage, you can buff them in order to do so. It helps you and your teammates with going faster and for them doing damage, and you take the enemy's aggro off of them. We're gonna first look at our character. My character's name is called Barbara, and she is a Whirlwind Barbarian, of course. And looking at her gear pieces, you have a lot of weapons. Barbarians are outfitted with a lot of weapons in general. They have 4 weapons in total. They have a 2-handed bludgeoning weapon, a 2-handed slashing weapon, and 2 one-handed weapons. This could be in a assortment of things. What we're going to be using for Whirlwind is going to be a slashing sword. Swords come with critical strike damage on them inherently. For slashing weapons, you can also have axes, as well as a couple other things, but they don't come with critical strike damage. They come with other things like damage to healthy enemies and stuff of that nature, but we don't really need that. We are basing off critical strike damage. A lot of the build is going to be based off boosting to vulnerability damage and critical strike damage and getting our crits as often as possible while we're whirlwinding. Looking at the one-handed swords, you're going to also just want swords. It's going to be tougher out there because there's maces, there's one-handed axes, there's also the swords that you would want. There's a lot of rolls that happen in these weapons. So we're using the 2-handed sword for the whirlwind damage. Damage per second from your sword is your main source of damage. Other types of damage that your other swords, like your one-handed and your bludgeoning weapon, show off is not going to help your damage in total. We're only going to be using them for passives and for their main critical strike damage that we're going to get from them. You don't need high item powers necessarily for this build to work at all. As you can see, these are not over 800. My sword is, but my other weapons are not. As we go through the gear setup for this build, I will put a stat priority list on the screen per each item piece. Well, you can prioritize specific roles on each gear piece as best you can, because I know the roles are going to be just luck of the draw. Some that you should more focus on because some are more important for this build. Others so much just like, if you can get it, you can. If you can't, then it's okay too. Main passives you're looking for on every single one of your weapons are going to be crit strike damage, vulnerability damage, close enemies, or core kind of goes in between, and then strength. You're going to be looking for strength because it increases your skill damage and your armor, so it's both damage and survivability at the same time. Try to get vulnerability damage and crit strike damage. The rest of it is kind of going to be up to you and what happens in terms of the luck of the draw. Your main stats you want on your boots are going to be movement speed and fury cost reduction, which will help for getting around the dungeon faster. Regeneration is the main part of everything that needs to be accomplished with your gear pieces, because without fury, you do no damage. If you don't generate it or you run out too fast, you're gonna do nothing. So in every gear piece that you can, you want cooldown reductions, fury cost reductions. The main passive that you would like on your gear pieces. There are uniques to be used in this build as well if you would like. Temerity pants are one of the best. Helps proc a barrier, and with barrier, you can survive longer. So I have an aspect onto your sword that will help barrier when it's active. You do just increased damage, so it's free damage if you have a barrier on. Gorse gauntlets are something that are extremely helpful with a whirlwind build. So when you let go of whirlwind, it will do an explosion of 20% extra damage that you didn't have in the first place. So when you're spinning around most of the time and you do 80% of an elite's damage, you can then pretty much let go of your whirlwind and it'll explosion and will do the rest of the 20% most of the time. With these gauntlets, you want to have the maximum whirlwind ranks. More ranks of whirlwind, more damage. The Whirlwind Explosion is just extra damage if you can get the higher percentage of it, but mainly focus on the ranks of Whirlwind. Whirlwind does not use attack speed, so raising your attack speed does not increase your Whirlwind spin rate. I wish it would work that way. You want to focus on getting Whirlwind ranks. You can get these ranks on regular gloves themselves, get the maximum amount of ranks there, then go for critical strike chance, strength, and then critical strike chance to injured if possible. We also have a Rage of Haggarath, unique for your chest piece. This will help for your cooldowns and bringing those cooldowns even more and allowing for your shouts to be procced more often. So when you inflict bleeding, which most of the time you're going to inflict bleeding when you're whirlwinding, you have a lucky hit chance of having your cooldowns be lessened by 1.5 seconds, effectively lessening your cooldowns of all your shouts and then being able to get you in the fight again, building up fury. It's a cycle. If you don't have the rage, just getting a chest piece that can help your damage reduction, and if you can, get ranks of challenging shout, as challenging shout will help your damage reduction to enemies, so just help you stay alive longer. Damage reduction to close enemies, or fortify, bleeding, increasing your life and armor, just mostly survivability piece. The helmet also helps you in survivability, but can also help you in your cooldown reduction. Armor, life, cooldown reduction are your main top parts of your helmet that you want. If you can get strength on there, that's quite important as well, but I wasn't able to do so. But just a high item power as well. Make sure you look for armor. Higher the item power, the higher the armor is, which means your survivability is going to be higher. You're probably going to want to more prioritize the passive rolls on some of them. The number 1 or 2 priority stat rolls, you want to get those, and then if the item power is semi-decent, like 760 pluses, 770 pluses, you're going to be generally okay, and you want to choose those that have better passives than the higher item power. But it's up to your discretion to see which one is better and which one is worth it. Now, I know jewelry rolls terribly. There are so many rolls that jewelry, either amulets or rings, can do. So if we look at your rings, the main stats you want in your rings are going to be crit. So crit strike chance and crit strike damage. We're boosting crit as much as possible, but also at the same time boosting your damage by trying to get vulnerability damage and resource generation. There's a couple more rolls that you would want with rings. You can also get more fury if possible, but pretty much building critical strike chance and critical strike damage along with fury generation, along with resource generation and vulnerability damage just for raw damage increase. Amulets are hard to get. If you focus for your amulet on cooldown reduction and fury cost reduction, this will help you in all your skills. As a bonus, you can try to get defensive skills upgraded, which will go for your rallying cry, which will be your fury generation, and your challenging shout, just helping you survive longer. Ranks to them will help your build entirely. Also, with heavy-handed passive, that is just raw damage increase for your critical strike damage. So more of that will just be base damage increase. It's hard to get, but just look for them as time goes on, and eventually you'll get a okay amulet or a decent amulet. For gems, we're going to be looking at usually sapphires or rubies for your armor pieces. It'll help with damage reduction while fortified and also maximum life. You can kind of go in between. If you think you need more life, you can put more rubies. If you need more just damage reduction, you can go for sapphires. Usually you want more sapphires, and I didn't have a lot of life rolls on my armor pieces, so I could just have higher life. For your rings, you want to have just the skulls. It just will give you better armor, which will help you stay alive longer. And of course, for every single one of your weapons, you want to be using emeralds, as it will just increase your critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. We want to do more vulnerable damage and more critical strike chances and more critical strike damage. As we go through each aspect, I will be putting the list on the screen of each aspect that is prioritized for each gear piece, and a secondary one if you can't get that first one. For aspects, there is a specific Whirlwind aspect that will help pull enemies in, as seen here. Will just be randomly pulled in. This doesn't happen on a timer. This aspect is very nice because it doesn't have any roll stats on it, so it's just base. You can't get it from a dungeon, but you can just get it off of one piece and move it on to something else. In your chest piece, if you don't already have the rage unique, you want to probably put a more survivability aspect on it, which is going to be probably a aspect of disobedience, which helps your armor percentage. Whenever you do damage, you pretty much get armor, increasing your survivability a whole lot. If you can't get Gore's bracers, you can put the Whirlwind aspect on there, like from the helmet. You can kind of exchange it around your couple of pieces. So the gauntlets can be a good way of putting that aspect on your gear. If you don't have temerity pants, you want to probably put the protector on, which is the getting a barrier when you attack an elite. Otherwise, the temerity pants itself give you a barrier. We'll go over the boots. You either really want Ghostwalker or Windstalker, which is pretty much just increased movement speed. Either while you're unstoppable, you do a crit strike. It'll just increase your movement, be able to make you go through enemies faster, or just be able to move through the dungeon quicker in general. For your weapon aspects, reminder that if a aspect is on a two-handed sword, two-handed weapon, or a amulet, it will double the percentage rolls min and max for that item. So for your most important skills, you're gonna go on your two-handed weapons or amulet. As in this build, the Whirlwind, the Dire Whirlwind aspect is one of the most important aspects, as it increases our critical strike chance and allows us to channel that up higher, and the higher that it can go, more times you're just doing critical strike damage. You hold Whirlwind enough, which usually if you can get enough fury, you can just keep spinning, and you can increase your critical strike chance by almost 50% at max. Two-handed swords, you're gonna have your barrier increase, which hopefully you have a barrier proc almost all times if you're going against an elite. The time you just want to be able to do elite damage, you can probably kill most of the basic mobs in a group, but the elites are going to cause you some issue if you kill all the small enemies before you kill the big elite or boss. You're also going to be doing bleed damage, which helps cause some CC to the enemy, some bleeding, some crowd control. Help the enemies not move away from you as quickly. So you can do up to 30% there. That is going to be the Berserk Ripping. Sword is going to increase your core. If you're spinning in a group, most of the time your fury is going to be maximum anyway. So as you generate more fury at maximum, it will help increase your core damage or whirlwind damage while you're spinning, effectively increasing your overall damage as you keep just spinning and spinning. For your amulet, you have the Edge Masters. So based on your primary resource, which is going to be fury, most of the time you're going to be max fury. You're mostly in a group. It will just effectively increase your damage with your skills, which will make your whirlwind do more damage. Your rings are important when it comes to fury generation. They both are really hard to get as they only spawn on rings. So try to roll rings as much as possible and get more rings in order to get these aspects, because they are very hard to get. As seen here, this is the Echoing Fury ring, as the shout skills generate fury per second while active. As we have 3 shouts, all 3 of them active at the same time, is going to gain you 12 fury per second as you have them all active. It will help you mainly on solo targets, as this build struggles to do so. Just help with fury generation. Next one is a Bold Chieftain aspect. Now this one is notorious, as in many barbarian people that I've talked to, they cannot get it to drop. Since this ring has such a high and low roll just for a ring stat that just only spawns on rings, it is very difficult to get. You may only see a couple, so be very careful about what you put these aspects on, especially very early, because it makes such a difference in your build for your cooldowns. You cast a shout, your next shouts are going to decrease any shouts that are on cooldown. The more seconds you can take off from each shout cooldown, the more you can pop them and the more fury you will regen. Rallying Cry is going to be your main generation that you can do. When Rallying Cry is not up, a lot of the times you're not going to be able to whirlwind if you don't have enough resource generation. So with the other ones, if you pop them after you pop Rallying Cry, you can help get Rallying Cry off cooldown faster and quicker. Without Rallying Cry, you're more likely than not able to generate enough fury to whirlwind. So you're pretty much waiting specifically on Rallying Cry, or unless you run out of whirlwind, you pop it again. Most of the time you're going to run out of fury if Rallying Cry is not active, even if you have some of these rings. Looking at our expertise, we are going to be going into 2-hand weapon expertise, which is just pretty much based to vulnerability damage and critical strike chance against vulnerable enemies, going into our 2 main parts of the build. You can level this quicker by using a 2-handed axe, not necessarily what you want to use on the build, but you can swap to it, go down to a lower world tier, or if you have enough damage, do it while you're just killing enemies, and you can level it really quickly and get it to level 10 which will help boost the stats of it. As we look at our skill tree, we're going to go into Lunging Strike. That'll be our basic generator. If we run out of all of our shouts, we pretty much just lunge at them. Combine it with Combat Lunging Strike, and you can go into Berserking if you hit a critical strike. This is just a backup plan when you don't have Whirlwind active. It's just somewhat of a damage and a fury building generator. You're going to put 5 points into Whirlwind in order to do the most damage, and then you're going to go Enhanced and Furious Whirlwind. If you put that slashing weapon on, you'll do that extra bleeding damage and also generate fury when you hit enemies, more for elites. Put on Pressure Point, which allows your core or Whirlwind skill to apply vulnerability. So when we run out of some future Paragon Glyph vulnerability applying, we can use this pressure point in order to apply vulnerability a little bit later. You have a couple of shouts, of course. Your first one is going to be your Rallying Cry, the most important one in terms of getting resource generation. You're going to put 5 points into that one, along with Enhance, making you unstoppable, and then going into Tactical, which will generate more fury and give you more resource generation while it's active. Challenging Shout is going to be your next one. Go 5 points into this one, along with going into Enhanced and Tactical. This will allow you to gain more life while it's active, along with Challenging Shout just being a damage reduction perk in general. It also will let you get more fury while you take damage. Your last shout is going to be War Cry. War Cry is going to be a good damage, just percentage bonus to if you use it. You go for Enhanced and then Power. This will make it so when you proc War Cry, it will allow you to berserk, and then if you proc it in a big group of enemies of at least 6, you'll get an additional 10% damage. This also can apply to your group mates if you're around groups. You're going to put 3 points into Booming Voice, 3 points into Guttural Yell. This will allow your shouts to be active for longer. Guttural Yell will make the enemies deal 12% less damage to you for 5 seconds. It's pretty much nerfing them. You're going to put 1 point into Aggressive Resistance in order to put 3 points into Prolific Fury. So this will make your Berserking allow you to do Fury Generation, which a lot of these perks do. War Cry will put you Berserking, and so will that Lunging Strike if that crit chance happens. And it can also apply to our ultimate later as well. Look at the Weapon Mastery skills. We're going to put 1 point into Hamstring, which will slow enemies, helping them not move away from you as fast. 1 point into Thick Skin for Fortify, and then 2 points into Counter Offensive. So this means while your Fortify is over 50% of your maximum health, you will deal more damage as time goes on. And most of the time in lower rank enemies, you will get your Fortify mainly the equal amount to your health. And as you get damaged, you get more Fortify. As you build it, you do more damage as time goes on. At the very beginning, you're going to be your weakest. For a huge skill is Heavy-Handed. Heavy-Handed is, while using two-handed weapons, you deal 30% increased crit strike damage. That's why that Amulet ranking is so important, because you just deal extra damage just because of that rank. Because that crit strike damage is what you're going to be applying most of the time while you're whirlwinding, or effectively trying to do it most of the time. This is one of a major skill that you cannot forget. Then you're going to have 1 into Tempered Fury, increasing your maximum fury, and then you're going to have 3 into Invigorating Fury, which will help out your more survivability if you're trying to heal of your life for every fury spent. Invigorating Fury will help your survivability a little bit. You're going to put 3 into there if you're struggling a little bit more with survivability based on how much fury you've spent. Use Wrath of the Berserker if you have the Temerity Pants, because Wrath of the Berserker is just pretty much bonus damage while putting you into berserking and making you unstoppable. It allows you to get a damage boost and get movement and fury generation, but you need to be able to provide that barrier for that extra damage. So if you don't have the Temerity Pants, I would suggest in the meantime, until you can get those, put on Iron Skin. Put on Iron Skin, because that will provide you a barrier every 11 seconds, which will help you, 1, in surviving, and 2, giving you that barrier to do that extra damage. Put the 1 into Iron Skin, make it Enhanced, and then go into Strategic. This will make it where your barrier is just a better barrier, but also gain you some Fortify, allowing to proc some other abilities. Lastly, with your key passive, you want to use Unbridled Rage. It makes core skills deal 135% more damage, but the cost rate is 100% more fury. Now, it's going to not feel worth it at first. I promise. You're going to run out of fury, and you cannot use Unbridled Rage until you have a little bit more fury generation, but it is worth it. You are doing 35% more damage than you would be spending the fury that you're already using. If you can get just a little bit more fury generation in between, just so you can use Unbridled Rage, it is worth the amount of damage that you're going to be doing is insane. So try to use it. If you really can't do Whirlwind without it, but I thoroughly suggest trying it. It will be worth it for the damage that it actually does. Looking at your Paragon is going to be ultimately decided by how much Paragon points you have to spend in that moment. You're going to go for a couple of specific rare nodes at the beginning. Brawn, which includes your physical damage. Iron Strength, that's more of a endgame one where you need some more survivability, so I'd pass up on that early levels. You're going to put on Territorial or Exploit at the very beginning if you have nothing. Exploit is one of the best glyphs for most builds, regardless of class. It applies vulnerability damage. When you damage an enemy, it will provide vulnerability. So without needing any sort of other vulnerability perks, you can apply vulnerability by this. It just has a awful cooldown when it runs out, so you need to have some sort of other way to provide vulnerability. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to proc it again for a long time. But at the very beginning, you do put Exploit here unless you have Territorial, which will help you get in damage reduction and do damage to close enemies, which we only target close enemies. Then you're going to move on up to the left to generate more Fury. This is a big Fury generation perk that you can help with yourself, so you get more Fury on kill. And then you're going to get all of the extra Fury that you possibly can and max out your Fury. And you're going to go to Warbringer, pretty much leveling your Fortify as you spend more Fury. Then you're going to have Exploit in for your second glyph, which is going to be that vulnerability damage as we talked earlier. And you're going to go down to get just raw power, which is just physical damage and strength. As you add your way to the third board, the Decimator board. You'll then go towards the glyph socket again, add Imbiber, which will help you deal damage while you're healthy, because most of the time you'll be maximum health. Go to Demolish down here, help you pick up some base vulnerability damage, which will help you overall. Get you some Arrogance, which will help you with damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, which will be most of the time any enemy that's close to you. And go pick up Pillage, which will be vulnerable damage and armor, so a little bit of both survivability and damage. As you're going to be in your fourth board, this is going to be the Flawless Technique board. Picking up Havoc, which will increase your critical strike damage and physical damage, along with a couple extra nodes for base physical damage and crit strike. This glyph is going to be Disembowel, which will help your physical dot, which is your bleeding damage. Just extra bleed to your enemies. It will mainly be killing an enemy, will help with your cooldowns. You can quickly pick up Brash, which will help with damage reduction. Just a little bit, it's not too much. Your fifth board is going to be Bone Breaker board. You're going to travel down. You don't need to cut around the furthest end, that's more later, but you're going to cut close and just get the glyph as fast as possible to Wrath, which will help your critical strike damage with core skills, which is your Whirlwind. And then things that critically strike will help with your Fury generation. This is a huge Fury generation problem solver for a lot of people. It does take quite a while to get to this point. I think it was around like 85. Every time you critical strike, which should be a majority of the time, you get Fury. And if you can get to this point and you're struggling with Fury, it is just so close away that you can do so much more with your Fury generation. You can pick up Vigor down here really quickly for some damage reduction while healthy and a couple bits of strength. And then for your Weapons Master board, you're going to cut across left for early game. You're going to cut down, grab Raw Power for physical damage, and then pick up your glyph for Martial. Martial's another big cooldown glyph. After casting a shout skill, the other active cooldowns of your other shouts are going to be reduced, effectively just making your shouts come back so much quicker. And you get a lot of just base physical armor. This is a good one to rank up pretty early as well. Then you just quickly pick up the Iron Strength for some armor. And then for the very last bits, if you can start moving your way right, is damage to elites and movement speed, so to help you just zoom ever more so and do some extra damage to elites. That's pretty much it for the Paragon board. Focus on those glyphs, leveling them up. Most of the time for the requirements, you don't have to have the radius upgrade, but you'll have to spend a little bit more points to try to get that radius buff. But that will do it for all of the actual gear pieces and build parts. We can go over a couple of combat scenarios. When you see a group of enemy in front of you, you're usually going to pop all three shouts at once. This includes Rallying Cry, War Cry, and Challenging Shout. Or you're going to save Rallying Cry if you can generate enough Fury to even start Whirlwinding, in order to grant you Unstoppable if you get CC'd or stuck in ice, something like that. as you can just get out. It's a get out of jail free card, but you need it most of the time in order to generate fury. Pop all three, go into an enemy group, spin. If they all pull in, you're good to go. By the point that they pull into you with that Whirlwind Aspect, you're gonna let go of your Whirlwind if you have those gauntlets, and everything's going to explode around you, dealing a decent chunk of damage. Iron Skin can be popped at almost every time. As you get a barrier with elites, you can pop that for regular enemies or just damage reduction when you try to go against bigger enemies with a lot of elemental damage. Wrath of the Berserker has a longer cooldown if you do have that. You will have to look at Wrath of the Berserker a little bit more carefully, as it is a little bit of a longer cooldown. You usually pop that when you're going to go against an elite pack or the end boss or a bigger boss of any sort, or you can pop it at the beginning just to go faster. If you're still spinning to the point where your shouts are coming back while you're spinning, keep popping them while you're spinning. That way you can generate more fury, even though it may not be your rallying cry for your base resource generation. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Whirlwind. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or question asking more about the build. Or I've helped a lot of people out on my Twitch channel by people coming into chat, and I can add you as a friend and look at your build to critique some of the things if you have some problems. Enjoy your whirlwinding, and I hope you keep spinning and winning.